Beach Boys. How's it going, Connor?
Wonderful.
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 Awesome. Glad to hear it. Oh man. We had a really good show last week. I went back and re-listened to it. And I re-listened to our episodes. Yeah. I like hearing myself talk. But it was pretty good.
What did we do last week? I can't even...
Jimmy.
Oh, yeah. Man, that felt like forever.
Interviewed Jimmy. Yeah.
All right, cool.
Well, it was earlier in the week, and then we released it later on. That's why you probably got confused. But yeah, it was a pretty good episode. I don't know. Just talking about the business strategy of Bitcoin Cash, which I think a lot of people overlook. It's nice to gain a little insight into that. What Enchain.
It's cool because actually we should mention it. Bitcoin SV was just released about an hour ago.
Yeah, I saw that. I actually saw that they were up to 20 nodes already right before we started this.
Oh, really? On mining? Yeah.
You got it up?
Yeah, we can look through the release notes here.
All right, cool.
So they're released, and so this is happening. It's really happening.
Yeah. By Wednesday when we release the show, it might be different though. But, I mean, it's happening right now.
Yeah, this is the 0.1 release. So the opcodes, opmul, opinvert, opl-shift, and op-r-shift are re-enabled. So those are just old opcodes that have been re-enabled. The limit on the number of opcodes per script has been increased to 500. And the default maximum size of accepted blocks is 128 megabytes. They also disabled the automatic replay protection that ABC added, which is interesting. So the whole list of changes are those we just talked about. Those take effect after the November 2018 upgrade. So you could run this today, and those will take effect after November 2018. They reduced the maximum size of peer-to-peer messages to be closer to the excessive block size. They removed the automatic replay protection. They removed the graphical user interface, which is interesting, but I guess that makes sense. Like, there's really not miners that need to have a graphical user interface, and I bet that kind of helps them turn stuff around quicker. And then they have just a list of tests here, but yeah, so.
I'm glad they released it, because a lot of people were commenting on our stuff, being like, why didn't you ask about the release date, or like confirm that?
Yeah.
So, well, it's confirmed now, so.
I said they were going to release it on October 15th, and they did it. So it is October 15th today.
Yeah.
And it's here. So.
SV, live. SV is live.
November, we'll see.
Yeah.
And I guess should we just jump in? We didn't have a topic in mind today. We had maybe something we were thinking about doing, but our Ryan Charles kind of inspired us to make a video about a topic today. We're going to put a link to his what he put a video out about. Was it yesterday? It must have been yesterday, yeah. Again, I'll pull up some of his other stuff here. He wrote an article and released a video yesterday, and the video was titled "How to Prevent a Split in November." Put a link. I think everyone should watch it. He kind of lays out every scenario that's going to happen.
That could happen. Yeah,
that might happen. And so I guess his video is kind of broken up into two things. So it's kind of like, here's what might happen. Here's what I want to happen. Here's kind of like the best case scenario that I think would be great if it happened. And then the second part of it was about, he said he doesn't care about canonical transaction ordering, which is one of the two major changes ABC is making in November. But he does care about the DataSig verify opcode. And he kind of went into some detail about why he thinks it's a 1,000,000-fold miner subsidy. So we're going to talk about the idea of like a subsidy for miners today, and we're going to explore that a little bit. But then he also wrote this great article showing how to implement an ECDSA signature verification in Bitcoin script, and why DataSig Verify is a millionfold subsidy. And a lot of detail here about how to implement it in script. Talks about the term completeness part. At the end, he thanks Clemens Lay, his co-founder of yours.org, and Craig Wright for discovering the hidden term completeness of Bitcoin and for motivating me to understand and apply it to this situation. So we highly recommend everyone go look at that. And I think it's the most important part that I think people should get out of this is, and Clemens actually talked about it. We'll put in a link because, again, that video needs more views. When Clemens initially did his term completeness presentation at the Satoshi's Vision conference in March, he actually talked about this idea of like why does Ethereum have gas, right? So Ethereum has this concept of gas, and it's essentially just a centrally planned fee variable. I mean, really, it's just developers determine, okay, this is the fee you're going to pay because we think this is a fair price for you to run your transaction, right? Whether that transaction is a smart contract or just a regular value transfer. That's literally all completely centrally planned, and you just kind of have to hope that it turns out fair. Clemens was actually very clear that he said, like, the beauty of Bitcoin is that actually the cost of doing a complex transaction or a complex contract or anything like that in Bitcoin is tied directly to the amount it costs to make transactions. And so that's just really interesting. So actually Ryan talked about that in an addendum here, kind of comparing the two to Ethereum. I'll just read it real quick because it's well kind of said. It says, Bitcoin has the ability to compute the cost of running a script by simply looking at the size. This is why Bitcoin does not have gas like Ethereum. The end game for subsidizing a bunch of opcodes would be that we surely get some wrong, and therefore need to change the fee rate for some of these operations. This would lead to a proxy of gas for Bitcoin. We would need to compute the actual fee based on which particular operations were used, then simply the size. Instead of being able to look at the size to determine the fee, one would actually have to parse every script and look for expensive opcodes to determine the fee. To do this efficiently, one would need to do this at runtime, just like Ethereum. Bitcoin has an elegant solution to computing the cost of script validation, and DataSig Verify fundamentally alters that elegant solution. All right, so again, the whole article is awesome. Everyone should read it. His video is awesome. Put a link to both. That kind of paragraph actually sums up a lot of the things we want to talk about. Specifically, I think this is the most important part. The end game for subsidizing a bunch of opcodes would be that we surely get some wrong. So he's not necessarily saying, like, if you do it this one time, it's going to be the end of the world and everything's going to suck and whatever else. He's simply saying that there might be unintended consequences for doing this now, right? And the reason why this is important is because something that we hold pretty dearly and wrote a whole article about is the idea that, central planning, economic planning has unintended consequences. It doesn't necessarily mean everything you do is going to go wrong or anything like that, but the concept of planning something today that you may not fully understand, which economics no one really fully understands, let's be honest. Like, no one knows how to properly plan an economy, right?
What? Yeah, they do.
That's a very foreign concept today, right?
Yeah.
But the gist of it is that it seems like for anyone on the outside looking in, especially, to me, speak to myself, I don't think anybody really understands what we're doing here with Bitcoin. I don't think anyone understands the complexity of the economics of it. I think that the complexity is beginning to be understood. But
and that was one thing Ryan brought up in his video. He's like, I don't think anyone really understands the economics behind Bitcoin. They're all talking about the cryptography, all the little technical details. No one's really talking about the economic importance of Bitcoin. And yeah, that's the main product.
Mm-hmm. And there's very few people that talk about that today. And I think that's what I think if you could sum up our goal of what we've been trying to do, is that, right? Our goal has been to ourselves understand that more and to relay that more, because I don't think you need to be a cryptographer to get a deep understanding of Bitcoin. And I think the biggest lie that's been told is that you have to be. You have to be a developer. You have to be... well, this segues us into a perfect... what we want to talk about with Segwit, right? This is what was used during Segwit. It was like, trust the computer scientists, trust the developers. Segwit helps. It's going to lower the fees. That's all you care about, right? The fees are going to be lower. And here, Corey, I'll share my screen so you know what I'm looking at here. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah. I'm a little lost. Okay, cool.
So the whole thing was like Segwit, right? The fees are going to be lower. We're going to change block size to block weight. Okay. And basically that means that, as your full node, you don't need, we're going to treat witness data separate from the block size data. All the critiques of Segwit vary. There were critiques of Segwit from a security perspective. There were critiques of Segwit from like a legal perspective. In fact, like I remember specifically Jimmy Nguyen was saying like, what are the legal implications of taking some of this data, off the chain or off the, like, what are the legal consequences? I don't know anything about the legal consequences of doing that. I just remember he brought that up, which I thought was interesting. Yeah. Definitely raised a question. But Roger, so actually Jihan Wu, I think, was the first person to, well, I don't know, calling it a subsidy. I think Roger was the first person to say it was a subsidy, but you can see here, Jihan said specifically that Segwit transactions were unfairly cheap. He said, you will find that the canonical block is less than 1 megabyte, but your transaction fee is so high after Segwit is activated. As a summon response, I'll just find the full response. He says, Segwit transactions is unfairly cheap. Roger quoted that tweet saying, Segwit transactions are unfairly cheap when compared with legacy transactions due to Core's centrally planned artificial price subsidy. Right? And so Roger, of course, ate a ton of, he got a ton of shit for this. He didn't eat shit. He got a ton of shit for this tweet. Everyone's saying, oh, Roger, the guy who complained about high fees and block size or whatever else, is now saying that Segwit transactions are unfairly cheap, right? And this is really, I mean, for anyone that had like a free market bent, I feel like you kind of deal with this, you probably deal with this kind of like double speak all the time, right? Where they say like, wow, Roger doesn't want to lower the transaction fees, but he's over here. When he's getting at a deeper issue, he's saying specifically they're unfairly cheap. And what he means by that is that let's talk about the economics of now you're going to treat witness data differently than whatever you want to call it, regular data, right? Regular transaction data. And the root of that is that basically, so they changed the concept in Segwit from block size to block weight. And they said, so let's just play the clip before we even get into it, because I think the clip actually does. This is Roger, of course, making Samson look like an idiot for 42 minutes, which is awesome. This is like one of the greatest videos ever. I rewatched this one just because it's so funny that it actually happens. And Samson is just like wiggling in his seat the entire time. So we'll play this real quick here.
Bitcoin and Bitcoin. What's the difference with the BTC and BCH? So what's the difference between Bitcoin and Bitcoin? What's the difference with the BTC and BCH? It's complicated. So what's your view on the terms?
Well, let's go back for one thing. Block size is not 1 megabyte now. It was changed to block weight, not block size. So now blocks can be up to 4 megabytes in block weight.
So in economic terms, this is called an actual subsidy, where they actually don't count the amount of space in the Segwit portion of a block the same as the amount of space in the other portion of a block. So, and if you go and study economics, you realize that subsidies lead to economically inefficient outcomes, and that's exactly what we have going on here with the Segwit space.
What about the block subsidy?
What block subsidy?
12.5 bitcoins per block.
What about it?
It's a subsidy. You just said subsidies
it's the mining
are bad.
reward. No, it's a totally different type. So in economic terms, you're taking money from one group and giving it to another. That's what's going on with the block space. You're charging lower fees for for space used in the Segwit portion of a block rather than the other portion of a block.
Well, there's actually a mathematical reason for that, but let's just keep it general. So your question was the name.
it's interesting, right? He's like, well, there's mathematical reasons for that. And then he immediately just turns away, right? And tries to change the subject.
Yeah.
Right. So anyway, I thought Roger did a great job in that whole debate. I think we talked about it, but he then again, right? So then he moves on further later on, and he actually brings up the idea that the block size limit is a production quota, right? So I think Roger, Roger very clearly sees this concept, right? He very clearly understands like Bitcoin is this economic system, and mining itself is an economic game. And I think he definitely has that background of saying like he said, right? Subsidies lead to inefficient outcomes, right? Where the market would have a better outcome. So in the case of Segwit, the miners are using the same amount of space and bandwidth, but they cost less. The Segwit transactions cost less. And so that's the root of what the subsidy that he's talking about is, right? Now, okay, so that's Segwit. I mean, anything we missed about Segwit or anything we should clarify?
Well, I'm just like, I don't know, because I'm trying to figure all this stuff out too at the same time. The whole subsidizing it on Segwit, like you're referring to, it's the same amount of data, but it's titled differently on the Segwit chain, or like it's because the block weight versus the block size.
Yeah, so they changed the definition from block size to block weight. And that was essentially their way of saying, well, if I'm this person running a full node at home, right? Mm-hmm. These like Raspberry Pi things, I don't need to store 3 to 4 megabytes of data, right? I don't need to do that. Sorry, because they say, what do they say? I think they claim the max block weight can get to 4. I don't know if that's true. Is that what Samson said? Is that what I'm thinking of 4?
I think he said 4, yeah.
And I've actually seen that number lower than that from like in reality, but who knows? So the gist of it is saying like, well, you at home running your full node that syncs the blockchain and does nothing, but they think it does something. You don't necessarily need to store the other 3, let's just say hypothetically 3 gigs of quote unquote witness data, right? Mm-hmm. You're just storing the 1 megabyte block, and then through their cryptographic protocol system, whatever Segwit ends up, whatever you call that, you have a way of knowing the transaction is legitimate. Essentially, it's a way to cryptographically prove the transaction. Now, everyone has there's cryptographic critiques of it. I don't really know, don't really care. I think just the gist of it that you're saying, okay, in the end, for example, you just raise block size to 4 megabytes, right? You have a greater actual transaction throughput than using Segwit to begin with. You actually have more transactions that can fit in the block. And so what they've actually done, and regardless to a miner, the miner is still taking in 4 megabytes of data, right? So the miner still takes in 4 megabytes of data in both scenarios. They have to process, their internet connection still processes 4 megabytes of data. It's just that in the end, what they're doing is saying X amount of this is treated differently. And if you use that data, if you use I guess, am I making that, use that data doesn't really make sense, but using Segwit itself is just cheaper for you. It costs you less in fees than it would to use a normal Bitcoin transaction to incentivize you to use Segwit. But in the end, the miner is still processing 4 megabytes of data. No matter what, the miner has a hard drive that they take in 4 megabytes of data and they write 4 megabytes of data to their drive, right? It's just that in one scenario, they're at the behest of Core, it's unfairly cheap, right?
Right. So they're basically incentivizing the users to go to this off-chain.
Well, technically not off-chain, right? Technically not off-chain.
Well, they're incentivizing users to use the Segwit version to make their transactions, in hopes that they wouldn't, because the miners would still be processing these 4 megabyte blocks still. But the kind of like the trick, I guess, that they're saying is that it's 1 megabyte block size in the end, but the miners still have to process the 4 megabytes. But they have this like this
the whole
Segwit
argument
solution over here, which they're cashing in on pretty much.
Yep. Yeah. And again, remember their whole argument was that we need to save drive space, right? It was the whole idea that you want to make sure that people can. I mean, in the end, it's just another admission that they're making crap up, because they're saying, well, we got to make it easier for someone to run a validating node, and yet in the end, who matters, right? Mm-hmm. The miners. The miners are the ones that matter. They still have to take in the block weight, the total block weight, right?
Right.
Which I hate that whole. That's like 1984 level crap to call it, to go from block size to block weight, and then like, whatever.
So essentially, it's a cheaper way, but you also have to have that underlying miner fee as well. So I mean, it's like, why? It's almost like putting a middleman in the way, saying that like, oh, you need a toll of like 1 cent to get through here, but they also have to pay for the gas to get through as well. You know, and yeah.
Exactly. Yep.
Essentially, it's like a toll, right? Am I understanding that correctly?
Oh, what, sir?
Like a toll, like on the road.
Yeah. Well, it's just a centrally planned fee system, really, right? No matter what you want to call it, right? So if we take this, if we transition from Segwit into why we're talking about this topic today, right? So Ryan Charles released a video and an article, which, as we mentioned, we'll put a link to, and he talked about this idea of you know, we just spent the whole time talking about Segwit as a subsidy, right? And we talked about the idea that prioritizing certain block space over another piece of block space while maintaining the same amount of data, but charging different prices for them. That's kind of the analogy of a subsidy in Bitcoin, right? If we kind of then transition this into like, okay, so why are we all talking about this now, right? So Ryan Charles actually was pretty much the first person to bring this up, this idea that DataSig Verify, the DataSig Verify opcode, is a million-fold subsidy, right? So we're about to play a clip of Ryan kind of stating his case about that, but then we're also going to encourage you to read the article that he wrote where he talks about that more in depth. But there's a few things that I think we want to talk about. Okay, so the gist of what you're about to hear, both in the presentation Ryan gives, or the talk, and then also in his article, is that he argues that DataSig Verify is a million-fold subsidy. Okay, now he's essentially arguing, look, here's a way to construct the DataSig Verify functionality in Bitcoin script today. So his whole argument while doing so is saying that today, if you wanted to code in script DataSig Verify functionality, you could do it with a megabyte size script, okay? Which today, according to the current rule set, would cost you $5. About $5, okay? The DataSig Verify opcode would introduce the ability to do something like that for 5 cents. It is about where things are laying right now. Okay. So this is interesting, because what that has kind of erupted into is like a lot of people saying it's not a subsidy. It's a more hardware efficient way of doing things. Okay. That is it's not a subsidy. It's just an improvement to using the hardware at our expense. It's also saying who's going to pay $5 to do a DataSig Verify operation. Like we can't compete with Ethereum, for example, if it costs $5 to do those transactions, right? So again, we're going to get into what Ryan actually said in a minute here, but the most important part of this is it's rooted in fallacies. Ryan has been attacked since putting this stuff out immediately, saying it's not a subsidy, and who's going to pay $5 for this anyway? If in order for us to have this functionality, we need better opcodes to do it, essentially. Okay. But at the root of that issue is the same line of thinking that Roger argued with Samson about. With Segwit, But then he also argued further about with respect to block space, because the only person that should be determining how much the 1 megabyte of data I'm going to put on chain is the miner. And the $5 figure today comes from the idea that you should be paying at minimum 1 Satoshi per byte in your transaction. Now, where did this idea of 1 Satoshi per byte come from? Where did this idea come from? Right? That's the question. The root of the question here, that's maybe a rhetorical question. Sorry, Corey.
Sorry.
The root of the rhetorical question is really, it came about with the idea that the block space was limited, right? That block space is a asset that we need to conserve block space at all times. So let's tie a 1 Satoshi minimum per byte of data that's going to get put on chain, right? The entire fallacy of we need a new opcode to reduce the cost of doing this operation is rooted in two things. Number one, rooted in the idea that 1 Satoshi per byte is the minimum, that it shouldn't be any lower, which of course is ridiculous, because of course miners are supposed to be competing on that. They're supposed to be competing for that 1 megabyte transaction. If I'm going to pay to put 1 megabyte on chain, the beauty of Bitcoin is that the capitalist nature of mining should reduce the fee of that to as low as possible, right? Miners should be competing to get that transaction, which incentivizes as low as the fee as possible. It incentivizes the best market price to come for that 1 megabyte. Today, there exists in a way a quota, in a way a minimum that fee has to be because of the 1 Satoshi per byte minimum. Now, ironically, nChain and CoinGeek are the only miners saying remove that limit. Remove the minimum relay fee. Only ones I know of that are arguing to remove that. Okay. So what I'm trying to get at here is that to argue, well, it's either $5 or 5 cents. Ryan Charles is arguing that we need to pay, $5 to do a data secret verify operation. That's not what he's saying, because as Moore's law grows, as the cost to store data continually gets cheaper, we're not talking about $5. We're talking about a fair market price to perform these operations, right?
Yep.
And that's why we're talking about a subsidy. That's all we have to get across here.
Right.
Before we introduce all this stuff, because people are going to say it's not a subsidy. It is, of course, a subsidy, because you're interjecting some central idea into the market to say, well, hold on. The costs here aren't right. Let's interject and set the cost to be quote unquote fair, right?
Yeah. Which could lead to economic turmoil.
Always, like Roger said, bad outcomes. Subsidies always lead to bad outcomes. I think Roger has made the strongest argument yet against data secret verify. Ironically, he's being, attacked viciously for this line of thinking. But I think we should play with the script playground that's been given to us until it proves that it needs optimization. And I think Ryan makes a good case that, maybe the way it's set up right now, where the fees are associated with the data size, because of course that's what limits a miner. A miner is dealing with bandwidth and storage space. Those are the two, and obviously electricity usage, but electricity usage stays constant for the most part for them, right? Electricity usage is directly tied to their hash rate. The rest of what they're doing is, okay, how fast is my connection? And then how much storage space do I have? As Moore's law continues to grow, bandwidth and storage space is going to continually get cheaper. Let's let that decide. Let's let miners compete and decide on a market price for a data secret verify operation instead of putting something in today and defining that, right?
Right. At the heart of it, the miners should set the price for the production that's happening of the chain. We were talking a little bit earlier about this. Like it's the more I'm thinking about it, it's like a pharmaceutical company, an insurance company, and the actual client that's getting the medicine, and the actual medicine that's being produced by the pharmaceutical company. And you introduce this subsidy of insurance all of a sudden, and that's where the prices start of the prices of the medications start fluctuating like crazy. And we've seen it the past couple of years. Some of the pharmaceutical companies have been jacking the prices insanely high because they know the insurance companies will pay for it. But to the actual customer that's getting the medication, they just pay the insurance deductible. That's all they pay. But you have all this garbage in the background going on where that's what happens when the people that are making the product, the medicine, which in this case would be the Bitcoin transactions, what's happening on chain, the people that are upholding that and keeping that, they should set the price based on what the market is willing to pay for it. They shouldn't set there shouldn't be artificial pricing involved in this system. And when you introduce like a subsidy like that, that's where all this imbalance starts to happen.
Absolutely.
And that's what our biggest concern is with this whole thing.
And yeah, 100%. 100%. We have a system that works Bitcoin as defined. The original opcodes introduced by Satoshi. Let's see how that works, right? Let's see how the market determines a fair price for those transactions based on data size, right?
Right.
Let's determine what is a fair price for 1 megabyte on chain. Ironically, I believe I've seen. I kind of wish we had looked this earlier. I believe Craig Wright himself has been saying, because he's obviously envisioning this future of everything on chain. He has argued a price per megabyte. I would like to know the numbers. He's argued at scale the price per megabyte. I want to say it's 3 cents. I want to say that's what he's talking about. I would love to pull it up. It would be interesting to see how the two visions are colliding at this point. But I think let's maybe wrap this up here. Let's just bring into what Ryan was talking about. Let's introduce this to the viewers. I want to make sure our point is clear though before we introduce this. Why we can equate these two things, right? I think a lot of people missed the leap where Ryan said this is a subsidy for whatever reason. Either it's ignorance or just like they don't want them to be right no matter what. But at the root of it, I'm putting 1 megabyte on chain. Miners should be competing to give me the lowest price for that 1 megabyte of storage space on chain. DataSig Verify changes that dynamic. It introduces something else that I can use to make that cheaper. And the question that gets introduced is that a good thing or a bad thing, right? So let's let Ryan speak for himself. We're gonna play Ryan's video here, a clip from Ryan's video. You should watch the whole thing. We'll put a link, but and then we'll continue from there.
All right, let's go into it.
All right.
Economic. All of those problems were technical. Of a bunch of problems with Bitcoin, what Bitcoin is. When Amari criticizes mind, it's actually very different from Linux. There is no global recover and supercompensate. And that's exactly what's going on here. Another thing I just want to mention is that people almost always misunderstand this, including, I think, ABC. No offense to you guys, but it strikes me that you misunderstand something very important. Bitcoin is not a software project. Bitcoin is an actual system in the world. The software lets you interface with the system. The system consists of things like miners and the mining power, businesses, wallets, and exchanges, people that exist in your mind. It's actually very different from Linux. There is no global Linux instance. There is a global Bitcoin instance. This is completely different. Bitcoin and Linux are nothing alike. Bitcoin is a system in the real world. The software interfaces to the system. Linux is software. Linux is what it is. It is literally a piece of software. That is not what Bitcoin is. When Amari criticizes Satoshi, he has a great list of a bunch of problems with Bitcoin. None of those problems were economic. All of those problems were technical. Okay? So another thing I want to mention is that actually Bitcoin is 3 things in this order. Number 1, economics. Number 2, cryptography. Number 3, software. Economics trumps everything else. Economics comes first. The cryptography does not trump the economics. We can switch the cryptography. The software doesn't trump either one. We're not going to salvage the software. Okay, we need to salvage the economics, not the software. The software can and will change. The economics are very good, though. So we can actually improve the economics by doing things like removing limits. So finally, I want to talk about why I prefer the SV rule set to the ABC rule set. I actually don't care too much about CTOR versus TTOR. I actually care about datasig verify. Datasig verify is bad because it's an artificial subsidy to what should be a very expensive operation. You can actually implement datasig verify in script if we can do longer scripts. How do you do that? Well, I'll tell you exactly how. Do you understand how to do ECDSA? If you don't, look it up. It's an algorithm that you can do in a few lines of code, ECDSA signature verification. You can do this with a big number library, and I'll tell you exactly how to implement big numbers in Bitcoin. You can use cscriptnum. You can do things like combine multiple
Is that you or
together. I think it's probably a bit better that we got things like opcat and opsplit. This is probably going to make it easier. You can implement a big number library in script. You can then implement the ECDSA signature verification algorithm, which you can compile to script. You're probably not going to write it by hand in script. You certainly want a compiler. You're going to end up producing a very, very, very long script if you do this. If you actually have ECDSA signature verification in script, I don't know how big it would be, but it'd probably be like a megabyte. And it would be like way bigger than any script people are using today. I mean, it's way over the limit of what you can do with the script size right now. So that shows you how big of a subsidy datasig verify is. You're reducing something that actually should be a megabyte-sized script down to one operation. Now, it makes perfect sense that we have things like check sig verify that are basic operations in script, because check sig verify is part of the money function of Bitcoin. It makes perfect sense for miners to actually subsidize everything around sending and receiving money. It does not make any sense whatsoever for the miners to subsidize these random other things like datasig verify. You can already do it in script. You don't need to subsidize this. What we need to do instead is we need to uncap the maximum script size. Okay? Uncap the script size first. Don't go optimizing what should be a megabyte-sized script into a single opcode. The way we actually improve the economics of Bitcoin is to remove these artificial limits, like the size of a script and the number of inputs and outputs and things like that. Then you can actually do things like this. Then you can actually write a compiler that lets you do ECDSA in script. So then you can do whatever you want to do. You can do things like all the use cases of datasig verify, you could do in script if we remove that limit. But you don't get a subsidy. You don't get to do these random use cases a million times cheaper than you should be able to do so. You're actually going to have to pay a transaction fee for a megabyte-sized script and for the permanent storage on the blockchain. Okay? So that's why I actually prefer the SV rule set, is that we're not doing something weird like that. Datasig verify is weird. Now, I'm not trying to be mean to anybody involved in datasig verify, but you just look at the conversation around implementing it. It's a small change to the code. And that's actually part of the reasoning about why they did everything the way they did. Keep the code change small. But you have a giant, giant, giant change to the economics. So this is why it's really important to understand that Bitcoin is three things. Economics first, cryptography second, software third. You guys spent all this time and effort trying to minimize the change to the software, and you completely ignore this gigantic change to the economics. So this is why I prefer the SV rule set to ABC. In-chain actually understands the economics in a way that almost no one else, I'm not even sure anybody else understands the economics of Bitcoin. There have been no books written on this, at least not that make any sense at all. And I don't think that ABC understands the implications to the changes in the economics that they're doing with datasig verify. CTOR doesn't really matter. Who cares? All right, so that's...
All right. There's a lot there. A lot to unpack. But I think it was good we kind of brought... I think he did a good job of saying it. There's no point in us trying to summarize his words there. We had a train come by. And that some of the laughing going on. We were laughing at Ryan. Anyway. Oh my god. I was just looking at you and cracking up. It was ridiculous. All right. So I think you brought up a few points that are important, right? The first one.
We're gonna have to edit this out.
No, we're gonna keep it. We'll keep it. It's fun. We're fun.
Okay.
So I think the most important one to talk about was that he said specifically, it makes sense to quote. He said specifically, I don't think this wording is actually a good way of putting it. He said it makes sense to subsidize cash as a use case, right? So I think there's a few things wrong with that. Number one, inherent to the Bitcoin protocol, there isn't really there's no subsidization of cash, right? The rule set was basically you can make a transfer from one address to another, and it might be free. Satoshi was very clear we should allow free transactions, or it might have a small transaction fee associated with it, and then obviously Satoshi was very clear that as the block reward, not subsidy, Samson, the block reward goes down, transaction fees would be used to, would be the incentive for miners to mine the transaction, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that's a very good point, was that, okay, like if we're going to enable these other use cases like data sync verify, which allow oracles to exist, and more complex functionality, should it cost the same as a cash transaction, meaning just a very simple pay to Corey redeems it, right? The most obvious answer would probably be no, right? Because Bitcoin, the peer-to-peer electronic cash system, probably should have cash as the first use case, right? That should be the primary use case, right?
Right. And that should be like the underlying thing that holds it all together is the cash system.
Yes.
It's like the rock to the system.
And I agree with him there. I think just from like a very simple perspective, ignore everything else we're talking about, ignore subsidies and like that. If you're going to say that you're going to make another use case besides cash cost the same or less, hypothetically, than the cash use case, that would probably not be a good idea, right? Now, what's interesting, of course, is that like Satoshi put nothing out there about term completeness. He put nothing out there about the script system allowing for more complex like smart contracts and things like that. And as Craig said in our interview with him, there was nothing about the marketplace. There's nothing about the poker or anything like that either, right? So it's not like necessarily doesn't mean that he planned for it, but we're kind of in this scenario now where it's like, well, you can't necessarily go back to Satoshi's words and be like, well, obviously Satoshi meant for the transaction fee to be associated with just the size, for example, right? Now, what I think is interesting is that we can pull up Satoshi on transaction fees in general. And it might help us get some insight on like, is this a subsidy? Is it something different? Right. And so here's some of the quotes here. I'm going to try and fix this here. So, very simple. This first quote here is very simple. Once a predetermined number of coins have entered circulation, the incentive can transition entirely away to transaction fees, right? So that's pretty clear. When the reward gets too small, the transaction fee will be the main compensation, right? So now here's an interesting one. There's only a few quotes he really makes about fees, so we'll kind of just read them all. If you're having trouble with the inflation issue, it's easy to tweak it for transaction fees instead. It's as simple as this. Let the output value from any transaction be 1 cent less than the input value. Either the client software automatically writes transactions for 1 cent more than the intended payment value, or it could come out of the payee's side. The incentive value when a node finds a proof of work for a block could be the total of the fees in the block. Okay? So he's kind of getting at the fact that a miner isn't going to mine something that doesn't make economic sense, right? Like if I try to pay, 1 cent for something, he's kind of giving this idea of a market, right? A market attached to a transaction, right? That's probably the first way we can start saying that. Here's a good one. Another option is to reduce the number of free transactions allowed per block before transaction fees are required. nodes only take so many kilobytes of free transactions per block before they start requiring at least 0.01 transaction fee. The threshold should probably be lower than it currently is. I don't think the threshold should ever be 0. We should always allow at least some free transactions. So this is interesting, right? Nodes only take so many kilobytes of free transaction per block before they start requiring a fee. I'm guessing this is US dollar, 0.01. I don't think that's 0.01 Bitcoin. But of course at the time it might have been, because he says here you could rake in a 0.44 Bitcoin fee yourself, right? And then this last one, we'll read it. Currently paying a fee is controlled mainly with the pay transaction fee switch. It would be very easy to make the software automatically check the size of recent blocks to see if it should pay a fee. We're so far from reaching the threshold, we don't need that yet. It's a good idea to see how things go with controlling it manually first. Anyway. So this is maybe pointing to the idea that what Ryan is saying is right? Ryan's saying it would just be very simple to say, he mentioned it in this addendum, the ability just to check the size of something and determine, is this fair, right? Is this a fair fee? Whatever else. Instead of having and obviously he's talking about the block size of a little different, but this is probably the closest you get saying maybe this was the plan, just have it directly tied to the size of what's happening, right? Okay.
So, sorry, I'm just like processing all this too. I'm like, shoot, I was gonna say something, and then I forgot. Oh, well, also in terms of gas too, I was just thinking of this because the proof of work versus proof of stake situation too. A proof of stake situation sounds perfect for something like gas too. Oh
yeah.
But yeah, the whole free transaction thing kind of tripped me up too when I first thought about it as well.
Well, it gets interesting too because okay.
What I was concerned about most was the incentive, messing with the incentive long term.
Mm-hmm. Because maybe it will come to a point where using Bitcoin as a scripting system and as a smart contract system and whatever else costs, like for example, right? If you make something like DataSig Verify really cheap, okay? And I'm not gonna, it doesn't have to be DataSig Verify. It could be anything, any kind of opcode that says, okay, now sending a transaction and doing this complex functionality is very cheap, right? When we reach that point where the block reward hits 0, okay, maybe you are screwing up with the ability to make cash transactions for cheap. So Ryan didn't talk about this, and I haven't seen this really talked about at all, and I'm kind of just thinking about this now as we talk about this further. If you reach a point where, okay, the block reward is 0, and now you are hoping, you're hoping Bitcoin's in use by billions of people, and everyone is just using it for, in a cash transaction costs the same amount as a DataSig Verify transaction, or again, I'm singling that out just because it's what we're talking about today, but as some other complex transaction, you might end up driving up the fees for all of them, right? And you might unfairly now make the cash use case of Bitcoin less frictionless, I guess, right? Because now you're saying, well, to use Bitcoin, no matter what, whether it's cash or something else, there's no block reward. So maybe now you're paying 20 cents to do both a smart contract transaction and a cash transaction, which would be really bad for a new monetary system, right? You want in order for Bitcoin as a monetary system to work forever, it should retain that function of being very cheap, very fast, right? So there's another point I wanted to make here, because this is what everyone says, right? So this is what at least is what I've been seeing today, and since Ryan put it, because Ryan has now become public enemy number 1. There's like, oh my god, I gotta pull up. I mean, the response to this guy, I don't know if Ryan just loves being publicly hated. But like, look at this. It's deleted. Ryan must have blocked him. There's this guy, and I know who he is. He's all over Telegram groups. He's just like, Ryan, fuck you, you piece of shit. He's probably in here actually. You have to go to show more files. Stop worshipping the miners. Hash follows price. This is Robert Miller. I'm gonna call this guy out because he's all over the place, being really toxic. Stop worshipping the miners. Hash follows price. If no one wants your shitcoin, Craig coin, never mind. You are clearly blinded by your faith in fake Toshi. Splits are only bad for retards that cannot choose the best chain. If you can't discern, then you shouldn't be operating a business. This whole video is stupid. This is the video we just showed. Fuck off, N-chain shill. Splits are inevitable in a permissionless community. We want to get rid of N-chain. They are parasites. Fuck you, Ryan.
So this is a PG-13 version of the Beach Boys today.
Oh my god. But I mean, literally, and then you look on Reddit. And the reason I'm just bringing that up, I know it's just one Twitter comment, but if you go on Reddit, it's the same thing. It's the same thing. It's just, I mean.
Right. Well, I think Ryan's biggest thing that he's just going after is like, why should we allow something to be enabled on Bitcoin Cash right now that could theoretically mess with the economic incentives long term, you know?
Yep.
Like, that's his thing. I don't think he's like really, he's not blaming anyone and he's not faulting anyone for.
Well,
he's not making assumptions about update verify. Like, that this is going to be what it's going to do, but it could be. Theoretically, it could be. And that could be detrimental to Bitcoin long term.
And that's a great point, right? That's really the root of what he's saying is that we don't know the unintended consequences of doing this right now, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And of course, we wrote about this. I'll try and find a good quote from Hyatt because of course, he's kind of the king of central planning. But at the root of it, I'm trying to find it. But at the root of it, I mean, that's the most interesting part is like, what happens if we change the incentive between a cash and a non-cash transaction? I don't think this is unique to DataSig Verify. And I think, again, if you're going to talk about, okay, maybe, sorry, this is what I'm going to bring up. This is what everyone's saying now is that, well, miners can now just charge more for the DataSig Verify opcode, right? So they can start deciding fees. They can start doing this on their own. And of course, Ryan addressed this in his addendum. He's saying like, well, that means you have to parse every single script and look for the opcodes just to determine a fee. And to do this efficiently, you need to do it at runtime, just like Ethereum. That's one of the biggest critiques of Ethereum. Everyone running a node that runs everything, right? It's very inefficient. It's very, and Ethereum is finding this out, right? They're essentially now being like, oh crap. Make it PG again. Like, oh crap, we got to scale this to the globe, and like, how do we do that, right?
Sorry, I'm not sure.
What was that?
Amazon. That thing goes off at the weirdest times, man. I'll tell you what. Anyway, so I think he addressed that pretty clear, like saying like, well, that's not as elegant as just looking at the size, right? And I'm going to take that one step further and say, I think to us, it's no secret. I'll speak for myself. You can speak for yourself. I think that I'm speaking for both of us. I prefer the SV rule set. I think looking at this release, there's nothing in here that's controversial to me. Restoring opcodes that Satoshi had at the beginning. This might be the only one people find controversial, but talking with people like Clemens and stuff, I don't think this is controversial at all. And then increasing the block size. Like there's nothing really controversial in this change. But then to talk about all these things, like maybe we don't know the consequences of these actions. I think getting Bitcoin back to, again, what Satoshi was working on and not trying to do all this crazy stuff and turning Bitcoin into the Ethereum project, essentially. That's what I prefer. Again, I don't want to speak for you.
I completely agree. And going back to our interview with Jimmy last week, I mean, that's the thing, is that Bitcoin Cash needs to stop being like this test net essentially, of like trying out different opcodes and trying out all these new developer tools. This thing needs to be professionalized, and if businesses are going to come build their platforms on top of this, you can't change it. You can't keep changing all these little things. Like, and if something bad happens where one of these opcodes is detrimental to the whole system, it's not a good look. You could RIP Bitcoin right there, you know? It would tank the price, all the businesses would move off, and we're already having to deal with that. Businesses are already moving off of Bitcoin Core because of the fees. Thank God we have this. We have Bitcoin Cash now for at least a second try at this. But that's why it's so hard to bring businesses on Bitcoin Cash, because we have already tried this. We've already tried this on Bitcoin Core. Like, who's to say that Bitcoin Cash is going to have the same problems in the future? That's why I'm in the SV route as well, because I just want this thing to get back to a stable, that stable original protocol, and then just continue to move on from there. Like, I'm getting sick of like all these contentious hard forks every time that it comes around. It's like, because if we don't have one in November, and like they keep planning to have an update every 6 months, there's bound to be one where it's going to be extremely contentious. It's going to split up, and it's could be detrimental considering we have the halving coming up in 2020.
We're in a race against time, you know? Maybe we should have this debate about adding this after 2020. I don't care, right? Yeah. But I think I operate under the same concept of, you know, we can't ask, you know, we can't go on Bitcoin Talk and get an answer from the Satoshi handle on what was the plan for scripts like this, right? That's not going to happen, right? But what we can do is assume maybe Satoshi understood stuff like this, and maybe we should let what he wanted to do,
or she,
he or she, maybe we should let that play out. Maybe we should let that play out, and let's find out if there's a flaw or an error there, right? Let's figure out, okay, is something not work in this original plan? And if there is, maybe we can address it then. But my problem is that this whole data sig verify thing was like, okay, well, now you can do oracles. That's really the big one. Now you can do oracles. And no one is talking about the fact that the Keyport guys did oracles. They literally, they've done it. They've done an oracle with the current opcodes with, it's done.
That's been my biggest confusion to this whole thing. It's like, oh, we can do oracles, but Keyport, that hasn't gotten the attention that it deserves. And I think, well, when it did come out, everyone's like, well, why should we be storing this stuff on the blockchain? That's not secure. Remember?
Yeah, the goalposts just keep changing all over the place, man.
Right.
It's nuts.
The whole saying was that, oh, putting this stuff on the blockchain isn't secure. Well, now you want to add a whole different opcode so you can add oracles. Well, what's so secure about that? Yeah. Everything you're right. The field goals just keep changing, man. It's crazy.
So, you know, we'll see. I'm not even too necessarily concerned. I guess I'm just so way confused that instead of restoring Satoshi's opcodes, we're going to introduce this new one. And I think that the idea of the fact that this can be argued that it's a subsidy, I think is very strong. I think it's a very strong argument.
I think there's two camps that formed with Bitcoin Cash, and I think that's kind of the main thing. You have the people that split off from Bitcoin Core, thinking that, okay, we split off from Bitcoin Core so we can do whatever we want, essentially. And then you have the group of people that split off from Bitcoin Core to build a electronic peer-to-peer cash system for the world, And I'll say it like that because that's exactly what that one camp is doing. I consider myself on that second camp, trying to bring this peer-to-peer electronic cash to the world. The first one, though, I think the first camp is so wrapped up in this mindset of the split was more of like a liberation to do whatever we want. I think those people also kind of fall in the same category as we can have a million tons of different currencies, electronic cryptocurrencies. And I think that's kind of where we're splitting off right now in the whole situation. I think, it's ABC kind of versus N-Chain and what they're doing with Bitcoin SV now. So I think that's kind of the confusion. And I thought, Bitcoin Cash was kind of unified when it first started. I thought everyone was kind of on the same page, but you start kind of going through it and you start to realize that there was different motives, and that's okay. It's okay that people have different motives when we had the split. But I mean, you and I are both here to try and build a peer-to-peer cash system because we think it's going to be necessary in the next upcoming years. For the good of humanity, that's
a really, really, really good point. I think that we've talked about this a little bit, but I really think the Bitcoin Cash quote unquote community, which is so stupid. Again, we talked about that. It's just so stupid.
Yeah.
The community is people, is humanity. Like you just said, it's money. It's new money. It's not this like, circle jerk on Telegram and whatever else of just like, oh yeah, we all use PCH and whatever else. And it comes down to, I think you can kind of split it into like, there are people that are just like, well, we have cryptocurrencies. So no matter what, we have these things separate from fiat currencies and we can use them and transfer them. And so really we've won. Like I think it's won, right? The battle is won. It's all good. But then there's people like, like you and me where it's like, no. We want hard, stable money that can never be manipulated, that allows for value transfer, that if I hold it today, it will not be less valuable in the future because of some central planning body that manipulates the money.
Mm-hmm. Perfect example today, Tether.
Oh my gosh, we didn't even talk about that.
Yeah. And I think that's the main difference is we, the Beach Boys, the BCH boys, want stable fiat. Well, not fiat, stable money. In the fiat system, and all these different cryptocurrencies aren't stable whatsoever. I mean, we have pump and dump groups like no other. I just got a message 2 days ago. Someone on Discord, I think, messaged me. It's like, hey, just wanted to invite you to this pump and dump group. It's not your normal pump and dump group, though. And it's like, yeah, this is stable. This is a really stable currency. Yep. We have pump and dump groups. That's going to be the global monetary system that we use.
That's a great point. I think we should finish that point. We should take it to a conclusion, because if you take Ethereum as a perfect example, can I send Corey? You and I could have 2 ETH addresses. I could send you ETH from me to you, relatively frictionless. I'll pay a low fee for the most part, and that's great. But if I were to hold ETH today, am I guaranteed to know that it will be more valuable less, that it will retain value or increase in value in 2 years? I can tell you right now, I have no freaking clue, because I'm going to wait and see what Vitalik, the god of Ethereum, says and does, right? They're thinking about changing the mining reward already. It's the exact idea of your money being at the whim of a central body, which is exactly what Bitcoin was meant to remove us from, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's what's very frustrating, is that in this case, I think you can analog it back to DataSig Verify. And again, I'm not picking on just this one. I'm just saying anything that we're changing, we're altering the way transactions are made as money, that maybe doesn't seem like it's going to have a bad effect, but we don't know. We don't know the unintended consequences. What is revolutionary about us being at the whim of what ABC releases 6 months from now or tomorrow? What's the difference between that and fiat? Really? Right?
Yeah.
Really not a difference. When we wait for the Fed to release their interest rates, right? There's obviously differences between the two things, but is there? Because if there's going to be another new opcode in May that enables all this cool functionality, now the burden is on you and me or anyone else to be like, no, this is a bad idea. Then they put the burden on you to say, you have to explain why it's a bad idea. Otherwise it's happening because technically it enables all this cool stuff. You can be like, well, hang on a second. In the case of DSV Verify, you have Ryan's paper here. You have nChain releasing the Raven signature paper saying you can do this with Raven signatures. And then, by the way, you have Keyport that allows you to do oracles with none of these things. And now you have to be like, but that's not good enough because it needs to be cheaper. And then you say, well, why does it have to be cheaper? And then now you get into an economic argument. You're removed from a technical argument. So now everyone's just shitting on Ryan, saying like, oh, what do we know? Not a technical argument, just this like, oh, you're messing with economics. I think he has a great argument here. I think he has an absolutely wonderful argument. I gotta be honest. I'm very, 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 this is just my own opinion, not speaking for the Beach Boys, very turned off by what I've seen out of ABC in public recently. There's a lot of just personal attacks. It reminds me to my core of what I saw with the Segwit stuff, with Bitcoin Core. It reminds me so much of the Segwit stuff, it's not even funny. Just this, oh, so you have no technical argument against Segwit. And it's like, so you're just spreading FUD. And then here comes Ryan, a very well put together video, a very well put together article. And it's just like, no, Ryan doesn't know what he's talking about. He's FUD.
Yeah.
It's bothering me. I'm just going to do it. Screw it, man. You go on Shama's. I just don't get why he's doing this. He's just, what he does is on his Twitter feed, he just pulls up people and he just insults them. He takes a good one is he attacks the Daniel Connolly, the SV developer. He says, guy paid by nChain says good things about nChain. Totally ignores the flurry of abuse and lies coming out of their CSO. That's just an individual. We at nChain are collaborative. It is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends upon him not. Daniel responds, that's pretty insulting. Daniel never insults anyone from ABC, anything like that. And he makes a very good point. He says, the source man income is very clear. What about you? Where do you draw your salary from? Who funds ABC? Just read the rest of it. He says, it's just very, 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 very reminiscent of what I saw on Segwit. And I'll say it. Fine. And if any of the ABC guys, we've asked Armory if he wants to come on, never responded to us. If Shama wants to come on the show, happy to have a conversation. Just very turned off by a lot of the social media like attacks and stuff that you see out of them. Yeah.
Well, everyone's putting themselves in tribes. We've been already put in our tribe, and it is what it is at this point. You know, I think we'll be public about it. We're SV side. We think SV is the route to go.
But we've been very clear.
Yeah, we've been clear about why we are against ABC. And the only thing I've been seeing from the ABC side is like just attacks. Proof of troll.
And we've also been very clear that, at least, again, maybe speak for myself, but we've talked about this privately. If ABC wins the hash war, fine. I don't care. Fine. You guys win. The miners decided it. I would maybe consider the Bitcoin experiment a failure, the Nakamoto consensus experiment a failure, because I don't think that what they're doing is good for peer-to-peer cash. But I'll accept it. I'll accept it as the best bet we have at that point in the quote-unquote cryptocurrency market. But I will accept the longest chain of BCH. And Ryan said the same thing. Ryan said the same thing. He said he thinks the best out. He thinks the best outcome would be Bitmain wins the hash war. I don't necessarily think that, but
I don't know. I'd be disappointed, but
I'd be disappointed, but I'll accept it.
Yeah.
Because I think it's again, it's now or never. We have until 2020. It's now or never. So
yeah. Not to say 2020, maybe further than that, but 2020 I think is going to be a big one.
I think it fundamentally it has to be. Maybe it doesn't because you either need a giant price rise or a large increase in transaction volume. But I don't know. We'll see. The good news is CoinGeek Week coming up in November.
Yeah.
A lot of exciting stuff being announced. In fact, if anyone's on the fence, I don't know what rule set to look at. Look at like the stuff that's going to happen at the CoinGeek conference and say you want to be on a different chain than that one. That's all I'm saying. I'm really pumped about the stuff being announced there and everything like that. And that's why I don't think there's going to be a split. I think there's going to be one rule set. I think we all know it's going to be. And I think we can end the show here on a quote from the article we wrote, Hayek. Socialism means the abolition of private enterprise, of private ownership of the means of production, and the creation of a system of planned economy in which the entrepreneur working for profit is replaced by a central planning body. I think that's all someone like Ryan Charles is talking about in his video. It really resonated with me. I think we need to be very careful about making changes to the economic system of Bitcoin without fully understanding it. So, kind of all over the place today, but I think it's a good conversation. I think it's an interesting topic. I thank Ryan for making the video. It really sparked some interesting conversations to you and me. We decided just to kind of wing it today and talk about the concept, but I don't know. I thought he did. Yeah, very cool stuff. I like Ryan. Good guy.
Yeah. We'll see where it goes. See where it takes off. We'll probably get attacked after this video for sticking up for Ryan. So.
Well, we always
we always get attacked though. So. Yeah.
So, cool. Well.
All right.
Look forward to more.
CoinGeek
we got
Week.
some cool stuff actually coming soon. I'm hoping that.
Yeah.
Good stuff coming up soon, and then obviously the CoinGeek. Really pumped about CoinGeek Week and going to London, and so we're gonna start harping on that hard soon. But cool.
Sounds good.
Good stuff.
All right. See you later.
Adios.